Is this some kind of joke? The young officer sneered as she stepped out of the patrol car. Her mirrored sunglasses caught the morning sun, reflecting a quiet main street that hadn't seen trouble in years. But to her, the trouble was sitting right there on a dusty, old motorcycle, still, silent, and strangely composed. James Harris didn't flinch. 82 years old. Steel-gray eyes focused calmly on the horizon. Hands steady on the handlebars of his vintage 1970 Harley-Davidson shovelhead. He didn't look confused. He didn't look afraid. He just looked ready. But the officers didn't see that. To them, he was just another old man riding an ancient bike that probably didn't belong on the road. A relic from another time. One officer's hand rested cautiously on her holstered weapon. The other walked around the bike, inspecting it like it was a museum piece gone rogue. "License and registration," she ordered. "And get off the bike. Now, sir." What they didn't know, what nobody on that quiet street knew, was that in just a few minutes, 50 soldiers in full uniform would come roaring down the road in military Humvees. They would arrive in formation. They would snap to attention. And they would be looking for whoever had dared to stop James Harris. But right now, all the officers saw was rust, leather, and age. James Harris had been waking up at 5 a.m. every single day for the past 40 years. Even in retirement, discipline ran through his bones like blood. He lived alone on a small farm 10 miles outside of town. A life of routine. A life of purpose. Yesterday, his old John Deere tractor had finally given out, hydraulic system gone. No worries. He knew every part, every bolt. 42 years of repairing his own machines teaches a man to speak fluent metal. And when it was time to go into town for a replacement part, he didn't call a tow truck or ask for a ride. He walked into the garage. He wiped the dust off his Harley. And he kick-started Thunder. That Harley wasn't pretty. It was loud. It was old. But it worked. Just like him. And on that bike, rattling down the road with the wind in his face, he didn't feel 82. He felt like the soldier he'd once been. He came to a stop at a red light by the gas station. Just a routine pause before heading to the farm supply store. But in his rearview mirror, flashing lights painted the street blue and red. A patrol car pulled in behind him. Officer Ava Johnson, 28 years old, 3 years into the force, approached with long, assertive strides. "Sir, shut off that junk right now." Harris didn't move. He handed over his license and registration, every document neatly tucked inside a worn brown leather wallet. The kind of wallet that had seen war zones, not just wallets with credit cards but memories and medals. She looked down. 82 years old. She read out loud. Then came the sarcasm. "Don't you think you're a little too old to be riding a motorcycle?" Another officer, David Lopez, joined her, grinning as he looked the bike over. "Man, this Harley's older than my dad." They didn't see a veteran. They saw a problem. "Hands on the bike, sir." "Feet apart," Johnson ordered. The search began. Completely unnecessary. But they did it anyway. Across the street, a few townsfolk had started to gather. Whispering. Filming. Some looked confused. Others looked ashamed. "Where do you live?" Johnson asked. "On a farm. Off Highway 340. Harris replied. "Alone?" "Yes." She gave Lopez a knowing look. The kind that said, "Confused old man, maybe lost, maybe worse." "You have family? Anyone who checks on you?" "I've been taking care of myself for 82 years. Harris answered quietly. Johnson sighed. "Don't you think it's dangerous to be riding that thing at your age? You could cause an accident." Harris didn't reply. He didn't need to. Officer Lopez leaned in and muttered, "He might be a little deaf too. Look at him, just standing there." Johnson raised her voice. "Mr. Harris, can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying?" The phones were still recording. The murmurs had turned into comments. "Poor guy. Don't these cops have better things to do? He looks confused, someone should call his family." But no one knew the truth. No one knew that 50 soldiers were already gearing up just a few miles away. Harris closed his eyes. Just for a moment. He took a breath, steady and deep. He'd faced worse. In jungles where shadows moved and danger came from all sides. In deserts where silence was deadly. This was nothing. But still, it stung. 50 years of service. Countless lives protected. And now, here he stood, treated like a burden by the very people he'd once sworn to defend. Across the street, the gas station owner, Marcus Williams, put down his rag and stepped toward the phone. He wasn't just a business owner. He was a Gulf War vet. And he recognized James Harris immediately. Something inside Marcus snapped. The disrespect was too much. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Fort Carson Military Base. Hello? This is Marcus Williams. I need to speak with someone in command. It's urgent. Back on the street, Officer Johnson was growing frustrated. Sir, you're going to have to come with us. You're not responding appropriately, and frankly, you might need medical evaluation. James Harris looked her in the eye. Calm. Quiet. And what exactly am I being arrested for, officer? She hesitated. Inappropriate behavior. Possible confusion. Danger to yourself and others. James Harris didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. But his silence was louder than any protest. Because he knew, far off in the distance, help was already on the way. Officer Johnson's patience was thinning. Her partner, Officer Lopez, now stood beside her with crossed arms and a nervous glance. A few spectators had gathered on the sidewalk, recording, whispering, watching. Mr. Harris, Johnson repeated, we're asking you to step off the motorcycle. For your own safety. James Harris still didn't move. His eyes flicked toward the horizon. Then, just barely, a smile crept across his face. Not one of defiance. No, it was the kind of smile a man gives when he recognizes a lie dressed up as concern. Officer Johnson, he said, calm as the wind. May I ask you a question? Johnson didn't like his tone. Didn't like how steady he was. Didn't like how the power of the moment was slipping out of her grasp. What question? She snapped. How many years have you been in service? The words hung in the air like a foghorn cutting through silence. Mr. Harris, get in the vehicle. No, she barked, trying to reclaim control. I'm not going, he said plainly. Lopez tensed. Then we'll have to use force. Across the street, Marcus, the gas station owner, stood watching. The same Marcus who had served in Kuwait, who recognized the steel in Harris's spine. Something stirred in him. Admiration. Whoever this man was, whatever uniform he once wore, he had courage that didn't come from training. It came from something deeper. And just as the officers started moving in to restrain the old man, a sound rolled in. A low, thunderous rumble. It began as a whisper on the wind. Then the vibrations hit the pavement. 12 military Humvees came screaming around the bend, dust curling into the sky behind them like a storm front. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Phones were lifted. Traffic stopped. The convoy formed a semicircle around the confrontation. Engines idling. Soldiers jumping out in crisp formation. 50 in total. And from the lead vehicle, a figure stepped out. Tall. Commanding. Decorated green fatigues. A face carved with experience and years of field grit. Captain George Farrell. He walked with purpose, eyes locked on James Harris. Not once did he look at the officers. Not once. When he stopped 3 meters away, he did something that turned the entire street to silence. He snapped a perfect, disciplined salute. Colonel Harris. The word colonel hit like a shockwave. Murmurs in the crowd. Phone cameras jolted upward. Johnson blinked, lips parted, unsure what she just heard. Lopez stepped back, completely frozen. Colonel? Captain Farrell turned his gaze, finally, to the officers. His eyes weren't angry. They were sharper than that. They cut straight through ego and straight into shame. Sir, Farrell said to Harris, we were informed there was a situation. The use of sir wasn't just protocol. It was reverence. Yes, Harris said calmly. Seems these two believe I'm a danger. To myself. And the public. Johnson stepped forward, voice shaking. Captain, we didn't know he was. But Farrell raised a hand. And with a single motion, all 50 soldiers behind him took one synchronized step forward. The sound cracked across the pavement like a rifle shot. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone sharpened. This man, he said, gesturing to Harris, served 3 tours in Vietnam. Led intelligence operations in the Gulf and Afghanistan. He personally trained hundreds of U.S. Army officers, including me. He turned fully to the officers now. This man, he continued, holds 2 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts, with 4 oak leaf clusters, and a Distinguished Service Cross. Gasps from the crowd. Mouths dropped open. Even the sidewalk cynics with folded arms lowered their phones, stunned. Colonel James Harris, Farrell said firmly, is a living legend within the United States Armed Forces. Soldiers from all across the country came to train under him. Many owe their lives to his strategies. Including myself? Johnson swallowed hard. Her confidence shattered. Captain, I didn't know. We were just doing our job. No, Farrell replied, eyes unblinking. Your job is to protect and serve. Not to humiliate a decorated veteran on the side of a street in front of civilians. Lopez tried to chime in. We thought he might be confused. Maybe a danger to others. A danger? Farrell echoed. He's the reason hundreds of soldiers survived missions that would have been death sentences. He's the reason this flag. He pointed to the one stitched on his own sleeve. Still flies. The crowd began to murmur again. But this time, it wasn't sarcasm or mockery. It was guilt. It was realization. He looks like my grandfather, one man whispered. Why didn't they just ask who he was? Another said. He didn't even raise his voice. She turned to Harris, her voice softer than it had been all day. Colonel Harris, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Harris looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. Officer Johnson, may I offer you some advice? She nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Never judge someone by how they look. You don't know what battles they fought. What scars they carry. Inside. The words didn't just strike her. They rippled through the bystanders. Through Lopez. Through Marcus. Even the online audience watching through phones would later replay that moment over and over again. Farrell stepped beside Harris. Sir, is there anything you need? Escort? Transport? No, Captain, Harris said, mounting his Harley again. But thank you for showing up. Farrell turned to the soldiers. All of you, formation! As Harris started his engine, the 50 soldiers lined both sides of the street in a corridor of honor. And as he rode through, not a single soul said a word. They only saluted. The crowd stood still. Phones filmed in reverence, not ridicule. And for the first time that day, there was only respect. But this story wasn't over yet. 1 hour later, a call was made. To the sheriff's office. From Fort Carson. And what happened next would change that precinct forever. Back at the precinct, Sheriff Douglas Smith sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, brows knitted into a line of concern. A man with 15 years of law enforcement experience, he wasn't easily rattled. But this call was different. It came from Fort Carson. And the voice on the other end was unmistakably serious. This is Captain George Farrell, Sheriff. I was on scene this morning with Colonel Harris. Yes, Captain, Sheriff Smith replied. I've been brought up to speed. I've spoken with Officers Johnson and Lopez already. There was, obviously, a serious error in judgment. There was a pause. A long one. Then Farrell spoke. Sheriff, may I be frank? Please do. Your officers made a mistake. No doubt. But this is more than an error. What happened to Colonel Harris was a public disrespect of someone who's given his life in service to this country. Now let me be clear, Colonel Harris doesn't want revenge. He's not filing charges. He doesn't want to ruin anyone's career." Sheriff Smith let out a breath of relief. "But," Farrell continued, voice hardening, "we, as a military institution, cannot accept this. It speaks to a larger problem. One that we have the responsibility to correct." Smith was quiet now, listening closely. He could feel it. This wasn't just a reprimand. This was something heavier. A kind of institutional message. Farrell didn't wait for a response. "We're requesting a full training program, developed in partnership with our base. Your officers will visit Fort Carson. They'll spend time with our veterans. Learn what it actually means to wear a uniform. To fight. To return. To age in a country you risked your life to protect." Sheriff Smith looked at the framed photo on his wall, his own father in uniform, a World War II vet. "It'll be done, Captain." Every officer was present. No chatter. No coffee slurps. Just silence. Sheriff Smith stood at the front, hands behind his back. Ava Johnson sat near the front, nervous but composed. Lopez beside her, looking straight ahead. "Listen up, everyone," the sheriff began. "Effective immediately, we're launching a new field protocol. Every officer, rookies to lieutenants, will attend a specialized training program at Fort Carson. This is non-negotiable." A few murmurs began to ripple through the room. "And before you start thinking this is just a slap on the wrist," he said, raising his voice, "understand this. This is bigger than a citation or a reprimand. This is about restoring trust. Between us. Between this department and the people we serve." Johnson slowly stood. Her voice caught for a second, but she steadied herself. "Sheriff," she said, "can I say something?" He nodded. "Go ahead." She turned to face her fellow officers. People she'd worked beside for years. People she respected, and who had respected her. "Last week, I made a serious mistake. I stopped an old man riding a Harley because I thought he was a danger. I didn't ask questions. I didn't listen. I saw gray hair and assumed fragility. I saw age and assumed incapacity." She swallowed. "But what I really saw was my own bias. And I acted on it." The room was still. That man was Colonel James Harris. A hero. A mentor to hundreds. A man who gave 60 years of his life to protect everything we wear this badge for. And I disrespected him. Publicly. Johnson took a breath, looked around the room. "But what I learned wasn't just about military history. Or protocol. Or medals. I learned about something bigger. Something we've been losing sight of. Human dignity," she continued. "Every person we stop on the street, no matter how old they are, what they look like, where they're from, they carry a story. Maybe even a war. Maybe even a sacrifice. And that deserves respect. Not assumptions. Not force." There were no claps. No cheers. Just quiet understanding. The patrol car cruised down Highway 340. Farmland rolled by. Cornfields danced in the wind. She gripped the wheel tightly. She was nervous. She had called ahead. He hadn't said much, just gave an address and told her the gate would be open. She turned down a gravel road. Ahead, a modest white house stood under the shade of tall elms. A large porch. Rocking chairs. A garden full of life. And there, near the barn, a John Deere tractor, partially disassembled. A grease-stained figure was underneath it, hands deep in a hydraulic line. A Harley-Davidson rested in the shade. That same 1970 bike, still proudly alive. She parked. Took a breath. Walked slowly toward the barn. "Colonel Harris?" The man slid out from under the tractor, wiped his hands on an old cloth. He looked up. Calm. Watchful. "Officer Johnson. You found the place. I came to talk, if that's all right." He studied her for a moment. then nodded toward the house. Coffee's fresh. Let's talk inside. Harris poured 2 cups into simple blue ceramic mugs. He sat at an old wooden table and motioned for her to sit across from him. Officer, he began. May I ask you a few questions? She nodded. Of course. Why'd you become a police officer? The question surprised her. I wanted to help people, she said. Make a difference in the community. I still do. He nodded slowly. Then asked, how many accidents involving elderly drivers have you responded to in the last year? She paused. Honestly? Very few. Most of the serious ones are younger drivers. Speeding. Drinking. Texting. Harris gave a small, knowing smile. Then why? He asked gently. Did you assume I was the problem? She couldn't answer. The silence between them said enough. Outside, the cows grazed in the pasture. The Harley glinted in the sunlight. Respect, Harris said, isn't earned by a badge. Or a rank. It's earned by how we treat people. No matter their age. No matter how old their boots are. Or their bikes. She followed his gaze to the motorcycle. It was older than she was. It looked rusty. Outdated. But it still ran. Still got him where he needed to go. That Harley had stories. So did the man who wrote it. So does everyone we meet. But there was one final chapter to come. One final moment that would turn this story from a lesson into a legacy. Part 4. Legacy on 2 wheels. Open on a crisp morning at Fort Carson Military Base. Rows of uniformed officers march in sync. Voiceover. 1 week after that unexpected roadside standoff, something extraordinary began taking shape. At Fort Carson, a new joint program was launched. It wasn't a punishment. It was an education. Local police officers were now required to spend 3 days shadowing veterans, listening to their stories, and learning military values firsthand. Respect. Discipline. Sacrifice. And most importantly, humility. And the first class? Included Officer Ava Johnson and Officer Lopez. They arrived uncertain, unsure of what to expect. But within hours, the walls began to fall. They weren't just hearing war stories, they were seeing the cost of service up close. They were meeting men who had buried friends overseas. Women who served behind enemy lines and came home to invisible wounds. Soldiers who had returned to civilian life, only to feel like strangers in their own country. Sheila, now in her 70s, leaned on a cane as she spoke. You know, when I came back in 72, people spat at me. Called me names. Never thanked me. But Colonel Harris? He made me feel human again. Gave me my first job on base. He didn't just salute, he saw me. Ava Johnson swallowed hard. She felt it. That heavy truth, there were people walking among us, carrying the weight of forgotten battles. And no one ever stopped to ask. Sheriff Smith called it the Harris Protocol. A new standing order for all field encounters. Officers were now required to initiate every civilian interaction with one question. Sir or ma'am, is there anything I can help you with today? No more barking commands. No more assuming control without cause. The goal? To listen before judging. To observe before acting. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a shift in culture. And slowly it began to work. Reports of unnecessary force dropped by 47%. Community feedback soared. People noticed. People felt safer. He reminded her of Harris. Same silver beard. Same steady hands. As they worked, she caught herself smiling. Thank you, young lady, the man said softly. No, sir, she replied. Thank you. That stretch of road now bore a small bronze sign, quietly installed by the local Veterans Chapter. Colonel James Harris Honor Route. Dedicated to the living legends among us. But the man himself? He hadn't changed much. Still rose before dawn. Still fixed his own tractor. Still rode that same rumbling, faithful Harley. Then, tires on gravel. A patrol car. Johnson again. But this time, not in uniform. She'd come on her day off. "I brought something," she said, holding a simple brown envelope. Inside was a framed certificate from the police department. It read, "In recognition of service. For your valor, sacrifice, and continued inspiration to the community." He looked at it. Then at her. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "But we wanted to." Harris stood, walked over to an old bookshelf on the porch. Dusty, filled with war medals and newspaper clippings. He cleared a space. Placed the certificate front and center. "Thank you," he said quietly. But this year, there was something new. At the front of the procession, before the floats, before the marching band, came a single motorcycle, rumbling proudly down Main Street. Colonel Harris. Wearing his old service jacket. Riding slow. Steady. Behind him? A convoy of 50 active-duty soldiers on foot. And behind them, a row of municipal police officers, marching in unison. For the first time in years, veterans and law enforcement walked side by side. No tension. No conflict. Just respect. His eyes watered as he held his phone again. But this time, not to expose injustice. This time, to capture a miracle. Because sometimes, change doesn't come with a new law. Or a courtroom. It comes with a simple act of decency. A refusal to back down. And the courage to stand, even when misunderstood. Colonel James Harris was never looking for glory. Never asked for thanks. But that day, when 50 soldiers showed up for him, was more than a show of force. It was a reminder that behind every old man in worn-out boots might stand a lifetime of sacrifice. A story untold. A legacy that still lives. And as long as men like him ride, as long as there are those willing to listen, to learn, and to change, there's still hope for what we can become. If you believe in respect, dignity, and honoring those who served, click like, subscribe, and share this story. Because some legends ride quietly among us, until we learn to salute them.